Welcome to Car Design Review for Laymen. This is where every couple of weeks I go out into the parking lot, pick a car, any car, and analyze the design. Try and get into the minds of the designers, figure out what they were thinking when they were sketching these vehicles and getting them ready for production. Today we're very lucky because we have a 2008 BMW 550i with a sport package. This is considered probably the most controversially designed 5 Series ever. But it's also the most successful 5 Series. It was built in so many other countries and sold all over the world in so many different versions, long wheelbase versions with different power plants. It was a very, very successful car. So to find out why people love this car so much and why people hated the design so much, we're going to try and analyze this a little bit. We cannot talk about the design of this car unless we go back to the 90s, because this was a time when all car companies in the world were trying to figure out what kind of technologies was going to push them into the new century. They were also trying to figure out the design language that was going to define their cars for the next 100 years. And this was going to be a whole range of cars. So a lot of companies were working hard to do this. BMW was no exception. See, BMW built really good cars. They built strong, well-executed cars that were not very exciting in terms of design. BMW built cars that handled very well that were not Mercedes-Benz. They had the ultimate driving machine tag going on for years, but their cars were not that exciting to look at. So BMW knew they had to make a change. About this time, BMW was getting a lot of new designers coming in. They had Chris Bangle, American-born designer, come and head the team. They had Adrian Van Hooydonk come in, and these designers encouraged all of the team to be a little bit more adventurous in their design. Get away from the norm of a BMW design that had been going on for decades and try and build something more exciting. And what came out of this was flame surfacing. And flame surfacing was a tagline that BMW called their design. And this was all about undulating surfaces with negative and positive planes all over the car. Some of them attractive, some of them not attractive. And this 5 Series was the first of them. When you look at it, we're going to find out everything we can about why BMW designed it that way and why people liked certain design features of it and why people did not like certain features of it. And to do that, we're going to start with where the biggest problem was, which was the back, the famously or infamously named the bangle back, with a short tail, and then the trunk was kind of just sitting on top of it. To make matters worse, the plane on the sides of the car did not match. So if you're coming from the trunk area to the side, they were all the panels were all in different directions, and that did not appeal to a lot of people. Still looks a little bit grotesque today. But with the E60, I think they did a little bit better on the back. When we're talking about the bangle back, we're talking about a clamshell design on the trunk. Whereas most cars' trunk side opening would follow the line coming down this way, maybe that way if they're extreme. BMW went with a cut line that was going really shortly into the taillights. And this meant that from every angle on the side, you could see that cut line. And it was not very appealing to most people. It looked like it was just a trunk thrown in there. The only other line that matches this one is when you look at it from a side view, the back window slants and goes all the way kind of to the bottom of the taillights. That's the only one that matches. But when you look closely at it, it looks like it was a 4-door coupe that someone decided to put a trunk on top of it, maybe for aerodynamic purposes, we don't know. So it doesn't look very solid, doesn't look well put together. Now this was a problem because this was actually a BMW series. We've been talking a lot about the new class of the 60s by Michelotti, and BMW was just following tradition, because when you look at those cars of the time, the 1500, the 2000, even the legendary 2002, they had a trunk that was a clamshell, just like this. The only difference is that they had a very discrete cut line, a dent line that was going all the way across the car, that was able to hide it, much like Range Rover and Saab does it to the front of their trunks. They are clamshell, but they're hidden very well by an extra line that spans the length of the car. But with this one, BMW just cut it that way. So they were following tradition a little bit. It just did not look like it worked out really well, because the lines were not hidden, they were just out there and exposed. But actually, this line is very important for that trunk because it was an ergonomic issue that they had. And BMW wanted to make the trunk opening a lot larger than you'd have in any other car. When you look at it, if you open the trunk and you had bulky items like maybe a child's pram or maybe your golf club, there's a lot wider opening and you could just drop your items in there. And you're not worried about damaging the outside paint of the car. If you damage anything, it will be the internal parts that you might get damaged. But otherwise, the boot opening is a lot wider. So it was actually a really good design feature that they had. It was just not very well executed to most people's eyes. Another thing that annoyed people in the back were the taillights. Now, traditionally, BMWs have always had their taillights of a particular design. They're mostly rectangular or trapezoidal. And usually the top is usually a trailing edge and the bottom is usually a leading edge if you're looking at it from the front. So the taillights were always carved this way. BMWs had that for years, and even Mercedes was doing that for a while. And when you look at those lines, that particular line that was going vertically always kind of matched up with a subtle spoiler that all BMWs had at the end of the trunk. That kind of always matched up. What that did is it created a very sharp cut, a truncated cut to the tail, which was purposeful and it was sporty. It was almost mean looking, like we were ready to go racing. But instead, BMW went with a leading edge facing the front, way at the top, and the trailing edge way at the bottom. And we can't even tell where the trailing edge is because there's not a definite line that changes direction. It's just one smooth flow up to the end of the trunk opening. And that really annoyed a lot of people. People thought that was not cool. It was a different design, a little bit of excitement that BMW was creating. Together with those taillights, you notice that BMW had LED piping that was going right through there. Most BMW owners always thought BMWs were going to follow this simple Bauer's principles of design, which is form follows functions, and you don't put any superfluous lines on a car that don't need to be there. A lot of those people believe this was just a little too much, but of course we know LED technology was coming and the designers were feeling a little playful that they could play around with it and put pipes in here. Really, really a great technological feature and a beautiful piece of design, but a lot of people did not think of it that way, and it really annoyed a lot of people. The rest of it is typical BMW, as usual, you know. They put the number plate area or tag, if you're in North America area, pretty nice. They designed one for every country so that they could save a lot of money. But just beautifully done, together with the BMW logo sitting there really prominently, telling you exactly what it is. And one of the best features of BMWs is the type that they use to declare what kind of car it was, what class of car it was. You know it's a 5 Series with a big motor in it, the 550. So, and with an eye, of course, for injection. But the type is so beautifully done. It changes very slightly every time, but it's purposeful. It tells you exactly what the car is. Other than that, two things I've mentioned about the bumper. If you look at this bumper in today's world, it's a little too plain, a little too flat. There's a huge surface of nothing happening, a few sensors in there. But that's the way they did it back then. It was just a simple bumper cover. Good for easy repairs if you had a little bit of damage. It was sitting proud of the trunk space opening with this beautiful little light catcher here to prevent dirt from getting up in here, but just beautifully done. But it's plain. If you notice a lot of car makers today, including BMW with the G20, this big canvas has always got to be covered with something. This is because a lot of cars have become a lot bigger, a lot wider, a lot taller, and you just can't have a big piece of space sitting there, so they fill it up with things. The G20 BMW has got the reflector sitting out here and fake air outlets or grills, back grills if you want to call them, sitting out there. A lot of action happening which doesn't really make sense, doesn't do anything, but it covers the space. A lot of lines too. See, BMW had just a little bit of that going on here. Pretend that there was a diffuser in there when there really wasn't any. Secondly, on the back, you'd notice that all the exhaust pipe was sitting on one side. This was again a BMW tradition of that time. It didn't matter whether you had a 4-cylinder engine, whether you had a straight six in there, or you had this big V8 in there. all the exhaust pipes, whether it was dual exhaust or not, all came from one side, either this side or that side. Now when you look at it today, it's a little bit imbalanced, not really perfectly balanced. And especially in a day when even a 3-cylinder car has got dual exhaust sitting on each side. There might not be genuine dual exhaust, but it balances the design so that there's not too much visual weight sitting on one side. But this is the way BMW did it. A lot of the European ones, of course, have the reflector sitting down here. This North American one has the reflector sitting out there. But still, a really beautifully designed back end, typical BMW, other than that little bungle back. One other thing I'd like to mention about Mr. Bangle here is that this trunk must have cost BMW accountants and BMW production engineers quite a headache, because even though it's in 2 pieces, top and the bottom, joined together, producing this part, pressing this metal part into that shape must have cost them a lot of time and a lot of money to build it. This is one win for the designers. The designers probably had an idea, they had their mindset on it, and they built it that way, and it worked out excellent. One other thing I'll mention again is, most of us will not notice this, but it's a subtle design feature that when you look at the tail light, it's got a little bit of a hump here. That is usually to help with the airflow, kind of keep the vortexes out of the back, help direct the air really nicely, not just going over the tail light. It also reduces a little bit of the noise that you have at high speeds when you're going down. But generally, a beautifully designed behind. Other than that bangle back, I don't know about that. Let me know what you think. Now, one of the first things I like looking at when analyzing a design is looking at the side profile of the car, because that gives you an idea about the proportions of the car, and it helps you a lot in determining whether the car is well balanced. And we know BMW are the masters of this. All their rear-wheel drive based cars are really, really well proportioned, and this E60 was no exception. BMW worked hard to make sure that it had the same proportions that they've had for several years, so that the car looks really well sitting down on any kind of wheel or any kind of surface. It just looks well done. You look at it, you can tell that the visual mass of the car is sitting right about here. That's where the passenger's head, the driver's head is sitting. That's where a lot of the visual mass is. So that pulls the weight of the car kind of back. It's typical of a front-engine rear-wheel drive car or a sports sedan. And when you look at the back, it's a short tail, kind of truncated, not too long. You know that there's some boot space in there. But this also pulls you all the way to the front, where it has a really long nose. And when I'm talking about a long nose, I'm talking about when you look at the distance between the center of the front wheel to where the B pillar joins or the door jab is, it's a longer distance, slightly, than the distance between the center of the wheel and the front of the bumper. That lets you know, for one, that either there is a very important power plant in here, or the front seat passengers have got excellent legroom. But those proportions are classically BMW. To go with that is the greenhouse, which is beautifully done. BMW did not pretend that this was a 4-door coupe. This was a 4-door sedan, a business class car. So you'd have to have good enough headroom for the passengers in the back, maybe 3 or 2 of them, and that they'll be able to sit there comfortably. For that reason, it's kind of a tall car, slightly taller than the E39 that this car replaced, but it's so well done that the size of the glass house, or the daylight opening glass, and the size of the side, the shoulder and the side, is so well balanced. It's kind of thick up there and a little narrow up there, but it's good enough that there's good visibility, and that helps the car look so well balanced. When you look at the rear overhang, it tells you that there's probably enough boot space in the back there. It's sitting really nicely, and that helped a lot in BMW claiming that their cars, or most of their cars, are balanced 50-50 in terms of weight. There was a lot of aluminum in the front of this car, so that helps because the front is a lot lighter than it normally would be with steel, and then most of the steel is in the back there. But because the passenger cell is pulled back, the proportion thing I was talking about, because it's pulled back that way, a lot of the mass, not just visually, but a lot of the actual mass is sitting at the back there. So you can easily have a 50-50 weight distribution. Even with a relatively big motor in it, The balance is excellent. Now when we look at the greenhouse, it always directs you to looking at the daylight opener, which is the glass area of the car. And BMW, again, are masters of it. Usually when they have it with chrome, it looks excellent. But this being a sport package, that is all blacked out. What that blackout does for you on the window frame is that it makes the daylight opening look a lot larger than it is. We all know that's the glass is right up here, but when it's all blacked out here and with the dark windows, it makes it all so much larger. So the daylight opening looks larger than it is, but it's beautifully done when it's blacked out like this. And BMW are really good at doing this, we know. Now we cannot talk about the daylight opening or the glass without talking about this little shape here, which is known as the Hofmeister King. BMW has had that for such a long time. You could say they've trademarked that design. Every one of their cars has that now. They even try to put it in their SUVs. Doesn't work as well, but in their sedans and in their coupes, it works really well. Initially, this was meant to be not a stylistic device in the car, but more of convenience. Dr. Hofmeister put that kink up there so that getting into and out of the car was so much easier, so you didn't have to bang your head. You can imagine if this glass was cutting up to where the doorway is, looking sleek, you would lose a couple of inches of space here, or a couple of inches of open area that you could walk into when you're going to sit in the car. So that was initially not a stylistic device, but BMW has converted it into a great stylistic device that is in all of their cars. That's why I say you could say they've trademarked it. And many car companies have tried to do that. A lot of them have done it well, many of them have not succeeded. What comes to mind is Infiniti with their latest design, where instead of having the curve going that way to make the space larger, it kind of curves this way. Go up into the comments area and talk about that. One of the reasons I like talking about the Hofmeister Kink is because so many people have tried it, so much that BMW is trying it again themselves. Next year, they release the G20 3 Series, and when you look at the design of that one, BMW is playing a little bit with the Hofmeister King. And we know how BMW fields are about playing with some of their trademark design features. So go out in the comments and let's hear what you guys think about what BMW is doing with the G20 3 Series on the Hofmeister King. Everything else now comes to basically being BMW. They did away with a little indentation line that defined the side of the BMW, even up to the E39. And instead, the flame surfaces is now coming into view. And as we mentioned, there's a lot of negative and positive planes on different panels of the car. And we can see that right here. There's this beautiful shoulder line that starts all the way from the headlight and goes all the way bisecting the taillight in two. That is a beautifully done line. But if you look closely at this line, you realize that it's actually a negative plane going like that. And then the next line coming up with a lot of tension in it is another concave shape. And that stretches out, and just before it comes to the bottom of the door jab, it opens up again and becomes another negative plane. So simply done, but I believe it took the clay modelers and the sculptors many, many hours to get that shape right. And it must have been really difficult and probably cost a lot of money to get that shape done. But when you look at it, it is brilliant because one of the things that it does, it keeps the design interesting. From any angle you look at the design, the light keeps hitting it at different angles, the reflections come in at different angles, and even the color of the car starts changing just because of this undulating planes on the side. And that BMW did really excellent. Coming from the Hofmeister King is going to be my favorite line of this car. Best design feature, I think, of this car. And that is coming from the Hofmeister King in the back door up here is that line. That is a beautifully designed line that you could use in a whole range of vehicles, and sometimes BMW has done that. That line alone makes this a really excellent design in my view. It's beautifully done despite some of the details that are around it. That line is beautifully done. BMW did not spend too much time, even on this Sport Edition, to have the rockers played with. They just made it simple and basic. It kind of bulges out a little bit when you look at it from different angles. It makes the car sit down nicely. It makes it feel lower and prevents you from seeing any mechanical dirty parts if you're sitting or hanging out in a lower area than the vehicle is. So beautifully done. Other than that, you can see a few other items like the indicator lights or the signal lights. That was a European thing. It's a redundant signal light, but it was left in this North American version simply because I think it's much cheaper than building a whole new front wing for the car. Concession to North America was that side marker and reflection light that is required in the United States of America. And in the back you have that too, but that is included in the tail light. So overall, the side view and the proportions of this car are excellent, despite some of the details that you see, the flame surfacing. The proportions make the car look so good that you can forgive some of the little niggles that you might find in the car. Just beautiful. Now coming to the front of the E36 BMW, you'll see that there's quite a number of changes from the E39 that preceded it. One of the first and biggest changes you will see is that gone was the sharp nose of BMW. That's where the top of the grille surface was protruding farther than the lower part of the grille surface. That of course was done for aerodynamic purposes. It looks more aerodynamic this way than it did the other way. It took a lot more engineering to get that sharp nose to be aerodynamic and stable at high speeds. But with this, they have an easier time to do that. So there's more of a slope coming this way to the front. Makes it look really aerodynamic. We also see that it kept the traditional BMW circular headlights sitting under a plastic cover this time. LED technology meant the indicator lights would sit up there, really beautifully done. That was excellently done. But BMW has always had the headlights that were either rectangular or trapezoidal. But this was a whole new shape that really annoyed a lot of people. You can't define exactly what kind of shape it is. And combining the side marker and the indicator lights in this shape really made a lot of people not very happy. Unfortunately, this was part of BMW tradition. Again, if we go back to the new class of the 60s, BMW always had the indicator lights sitting up here. Only that time, they were separate. The indicator light was sitting up there, and the individual headlights were sitting down here. But now they've combined it and made it all into one unit. That had a lot of people really, really annoyed. It's a stylistic feature when you look at it more than basic design. They had to make a little bit of an excitement into the design. Regardless, it is beautifully executed with that clamshell hood and those lines kind of pointing towards the double kidney, which is a traditional BMW grille. All those lines point you straight towards the kidney. It doesn't point you to the BMW emblem sitting on top of the hood, but it points you down here. Pointed nose that is purposeful and shows a little bit of power. As opposed to the E39 where the grille was part of the hood, this time it was separated but sealed very nicely for aerodynamic purposes. Some of the best design details that you see on the headlight here is that this is the basic datum line for the headlight. That references the whole front end to me. It has this beautiful light catchers. There's areas that will reflect light at different angles, and that has been sculptured beautifully as it moves in there. It changes a little bit, the radii changes. But also you'll notice that if you look carefully, it's a negative plane. It kind of goes down and pulls right back out, stretching. Again, a lot of tension in all these lines. BMW really did that well. And the grille too, it's not just sitting in the front bumper piece, it is kind of recessed in an indent, beautifully done. A lot of light catches there that will reflect light. You do notice that even though it's a sport package, the grille, the kidney grills are all chrome. That is a little bit of ornamentation that BMW put in there. It looks really classy instead of having a lot of chrome pieces all around. That is the only chrome piece you see on the outside, other than the one sitting around the traditional emblem that they had to keep. Other than that, this being the 550, it's got the more aggressive bumper, not quite the M5 bumper, but still, it's got the big aggressive front bumper with the grille openings up in there, letting you know that we are ready to suck in a lot of air to cool the big, powerful motor, even if you have a straight 6 in there or a big V8 in there. That opening lets you know that we're about to suck in some air and we're about to cool some stuff off. Then, of course, they put the obligatory fog lights, or sport lights as we used to call them. The overall shape of the front, really, really nicely done. A lot of flame surfacing going on, but I'd say it's a really, really good job on the front end. So there you have it, the BMW E60 5 Series. A very complicated design, but a very modern design at the same time. A successful car, as we've come to realize. Now, Chris Bangle, the head of design, got a lot of flack for the design of this car. But I think it should be the opposite. I think David Arcanelli, who designed this car, should get the credit he deserves for designing a very futuristic, modern BMW. A design language that is continuing up until today and creating so much excitement in the BMW range. So I think this is more an avant-garde design than anything else. And I think it's a really, really well-balanced design. So until next time, give me your comments on the reviews, both positive and negative, until we have our next video. Thank you.